Luke chapter 20, verses 19 and 20 said, "And he took bread, gave thanks and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, 'This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me.' In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, 'This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you.'" Later in this service, we're going to be partaking of the Lord's Supper or communion or Eucharist, whatever the terminology that you're used to. These are all names for the same thing as the covenant meal that Jesus had. In this passage that I just read, the disciples were with Jesus commemorating the Passover feast. This was coming into the time of his death that weekend, Good Friday. They were remembering how God delivered them out of Egypt, how God had promised the Israelites that he would free them from slavery. This was what the Passover feast is about. This is about remembering what is done. But God had Jesus reveal to his disciples a new covenant during this meal together. It was the promise of freedom for everyone from the slavery of sin that Jesus was about ready to pay the price for. And it was a free gift that we do have to accept. We do have to put our faith in. But many times we miss the richness of this meal. We miss the richness of this new covenant. Jesus was replacing an old imperfect covenant with a new perfect covenant. Sometimes we miss this because we do not understand what a covenant means, or what a covenant is, or how it comes to be. We don't understand the parts of a covenant. And today I want to go through, today and next week as well, go through the parts of a covenant and what it means and what it meant and what Jesus used. There are 9 parts to a covenant. Some of the steps of a covenant are built on previous steps. Some can be done out of order. That doesn't really matter. But there are certain things that have to be done, and all 9 of these, for a covenant to be a real covenant, all 9 of these have to happen. Now, sometimes you might have heard that a covenant is like a contract. In a very loosey-goosey sort of way, yes. A contract is based on punishment or negative things happening. You know, you enter into a contract to buy a house or buy a car. The contract is you pay. If you don't, we take the car or the house. So it's built on punishment. A covenant is built on a relationship, on a growing together. It's the building of relationships that's so powerful in the covenants. To enter into a covenant means I want to be in relationship with you. I don't know, when I bought my car, and there's a bank that owns the contract on it, I don't want to be in a relationship with them. You know, I just want my car paid off. Covenant is I want to be in relationship with you. Now, there are different types of covenants mentioned in the Bible. I know there's 5 or 6 different types, but we're going to be talking about blood covenants, the major, most important covenant that there is. As we look at the various parts of the blood covenants, you'll see how the parties, and it's 2 people or 2 parties, come together in relationship. So here are the steps of the blood covenant. Number 1 is called the pre-ceremony, if you will. It's the kind of getting together where the 2 parties kind of come and they might have in mind maybe a covenant. I'm not sure whether this is going to work out or not. You know, I'm not sure that I really like this other party, or it's kind of a getting to know each other with the idea that maybe this can go forward and maybe it won't. But as you sit there and you talk and you think about this, you may even have thought about it before you got to this meeting. You talk about and think about what the benefits of a covenant with this other person would be. Okay? You think, in the business world, it's called ROI, return on investment. Okay? What I'm giving out there, what am I getting in return? What I'm offering, what am I getting in return? And what they're offering, what they're wanting from me, what do I have to give them in return? Covenants were for life versus contracts are for just the term of how many months or years you have to pay, whatever it is. Contracts come to an end. Covenants do not come to an end. Now, there is one exception, and I'll speak to that later on in the teaching, either today or next Sunday. But other than that one exception, all covenants were for life. Before going any further, these two parties had to answer this question, and they had to be yes. Yes, pursuing a covenant with this party or this person is worth it. It's something I want to do. It's something that I can give myself to. I can give all myself to, and they will give all themselves to me. There's an aspect of covenants that we need to be aware of. Not all covenants were equal parties coming together. Okay? If some of us came into covenant, we would take a look and we'd say, okay, you have some goods and services, I have some goods and services, you have family that's strong, I have family that's strong. Yeah, we could become better together. And so we would come together in covenant for life, and we would be stronger that way. But there are types of covenants where there is a party who is so strong that the other one has nothing to offer. But still, the strong party wants to come into covenant with the weaker party. That's what God did with us. We had nothing to offer God, not one thing. And God had everything to offer us. That's an unequal covenant, but still a valid blood covenant. It doesn't matter whether you're equal or unequal in a covenant. The covenant remains unchanged. The terms of the covenant remain unchanged. And it's usually the stronger party is the one that initiates the blood covenant with the weaker party. And you can understand, if we're talking about God here, you understand He's the one that initiated this covenant with us. There was a pre-ceremony, if you will. We find this in Ephesians chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. It says, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who has blessed us in the heavenly realms with every spiritual blessing. For He chose us in Him before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in His sight." God had decided to have a covenant with us even before He started creating the world. Okay? So there is the pre-ceremony of what we are part of. The second step of the covenant is called the selection of representatives and the selection of the sacrifice. When you have a blood sacrifice, there has to be blood spills. It's important to decide in a covenant who's going to be the representatives. Okay? If two of us came together, I would be a representative and you would be the other representative. We would represent each other. Then we together would decide on what the sacrifice would be. We would decide what animal we were going to have or what animals we were going to have, and et cetera, et cetera. In the blood covenant, the new covenant that God was initiating, God selected Jesus to be his representative. Jesus being equally God and man, Jesus was also selected to be man's representative. Okay? So not only do we have a representative, but God's being represented by Jesus, and we are being represented by Jesus in one. And then we have to select the sacrifice. Well, Jesus became the sacrifice. It was his blood. So the totality of all the parties involved was Jesus. Jesus, God's representative, Jesus, man's representative, and Jesus, the sacrifice. Jesus did everything. He did it all. It was surrounding him. The third part of the covenant was the exchange of clothes or robes, belts and weapons. There was an exchange of property. And this is where things were starting to get down to business. Okay, we've decided, yes, we want to go into a covenant. We decided to select who was going to be what and what the sacrifice were. We decided, that's all been decided. Now it's going to, okay, now we're going to start exchanging stuff. And there's meanings behind this. The decision for covenant was made. And so throughout this covenant ritual, there's various acts that were displayed by the two parties, the two individuals, that represented them becoming one. And that's what a covenant actually is two becoming one. Think of a marriage covenant. A lot of ceremonies talk about, the bride and the groom are no longer bride and groom, but they are one married couple. And what God has brought together, let no man cut apart. That's the concept of covenant, of becoming one. And so to symbolize this coming together, there was an exchange of clothes or robes. This meant, if I gave you my robe, this meant that what I have is yours. My provisions are yours. Everything I have, you have a right to. And everything that you have, I have a right to. You would then exchange, give me your robe. We're saying at that point in time that I could come over to your house, get your checkbook, and write a check. And you would welcome me to do that. And vice versa. You could come over to my house and get whatever you wanted. And you were welcome to do that, because what is mine is yours and what's yours is mine. Understand, two coming together. This is a big thing. It's a big deal. But it also had this: whatever debts are yours are also mine. And whatever I owe people, you will now owe. It wasn't just the positive side of things that you were getting. You're getting the bad parts as well. It was a complete coming together. This is kind of a point where, you kind of think about, no wonder you started wondering the pros and cons when that pre-ceremony you come together with somebody else. Am I sure that I want to go in covenant with them? They owe everybody and their brother, and they don't have any wealth. Yeah, I'm not sure I want to go in and risk my well-being to take over their debts. See some of the stuff there, that pros and cons, that pre-ceremony, you kind of look and see, yeah, I know you. I'm not sure I want to get involved with you that way. But by this time, they're at this point. Then next, they exchange belts. And in our culture, that really doesn't mean too much. But in the New Testament times, it meant so much more. The belt is what held a person's weapons. The strength of a person was based on the strength of his weapons. So by exchanging belts, you are saying, the strengths I have, I am giving to you. And the strengths that you have, you're giving to me. So that we are not only giving the weaknesses, but we are giving each other our strengths. Again, coming together. But the exchange of weapons, even though they're held on the belt, had a little bit different meaning, but was closely related to the belt. When you gave the belt that had that my strengths are yours, and you had the weapons, you were telling the other person, your fights are my fights. Whoever comes against you comes against me. And likewise, if I have any enemies that are going to come against me, then you are responsible for helping me out. I don't know, you've all heard some scene or some show or something where some guy gets in a fight, then all of a sudden people come out of the woodwork on each side to help those two guys. That's a silly kind of way that this means, you know. You're going to pick on my friend, you're picking on me too. That's what this symbolized. Jesus took on our clothes. What do we have to offer Jesus? We had our filthy rags or robes of sin and unrighteousness. That's what we had to offer him. But you know what he did? He took those on himself. He took that unrighteousness from us. And in exchange, he clothed us in righteousness. So there was an exchange of clothes, an uneven, unequal exchange of clothes. But this is what Jesus willingly did for us. Took our dirty, filthy rags and gave us pure white robes of righteousness. It is written in Scripture, he who knew no sin became our sin, and our sin was nailed to the cross. He became what we were. And even God, in this unequal covenant, took our weaknesses, all of our weaknesses, and gave all of our strengths to him, to us. And God will also take on our enemies. Now, before you get hooping and hollering about all that kind of stuff and what that means and all your enemies, we have to find out what God said about enemies. God will take on your enemies. But Jesus said, you have heard that it is said, love your neighbor and hate your enemies. But then Jesus says, but I tell you, love your enemies. So God is going to love our enemies. He's going to take them on, but he's going to love them. That's how God's going to take on our enemies. But if they continue to become enemies and they're enemies of God's, then there is going to be a time of reckoning at the end where God's enemies will be destroyed. The fourth step is the walk unto death. Up to this point in the covenant, you could back out of it. You could walk away from it. You go, oh, you know what? I've had second thoughts. I'm not want to do this. And it was fine. There was no problems. But once this step was completed, the walk unto death, there was no turning back. There was no, I take it back. No. What happened at this time, at this step, was where the sacrifice that had been selected was killed. The blood was shed. And in these covenants, in these covenant rituals, the sacrifices were killed and they were cut in two, front to back, and they were laid out wide, apart, so enough room so a person could walk through between the two parts. Depending on how many the sacrifices, it depends on how big the walk of death was. When God made covenant with Abraham, he had several different animals, and they were set apart. And the walk of death is the two parties of the covenant would walk in between and around the sacrifice, almost like a figure eight. You'd see them walking through the middle and around and come back through and around. And it was during this time that the parties would say something along these lines, referring to the sacrifices being cut and killed. So be it done to me as has been done to this animal, if I do not keep the terms of this covenant. This is where the commitment was made as you were walking through the blood of the sacrifice. You were saying, if I don't keep the terms of this covenant, may I be killed and cut up like these sacrifices. Basically, if I mess up, may I be slaughtered if I renege on this covenant. By doing this, the parties were giving themselves to each other. This was the point of no return. The only way that this covenant could be broken was by death. And again, I refer to the marriage ceremony that says, "Till death do us part." This covenant is to death. Jesus also took a walk unto death. He walked down the Via Dolorosa, carrying his cross to Golgotha for each one of us. It was the point of no return. Once Jesus was sacrificed, there was no undoing the sacrifice. In the garden, Jesus asked that the cup be taken from him. The cup of covenant is what he was talking about. This new covenant, this thing that I'm getting ready to do. If there's another way, God, Father, if there's another way that you can accomplish what you want to accomplish without me going through this, please do it. But as we know, Jesus said, "Not my will, but yours be done." He was saying by that, I will take this walk of death. I will be the covenant sacrifice. I will be the mediator of the new covenant. I will represent you, Father, as well as mankind, and I will be the sacrifice. He's submitting to this walk of death. But Jesus asks us, and Mark, this is the time. We're just going to invite the children to come back up to partake of the communion. Jesus asks us to do what he did in the garden. He asks us to do or take or walk that walk unto death, and to keep our side of the covenant. The death that he's talking about is the death to our will, the death to ourself. the death of our own lordship over our lives. Kill those things. Take that walk into death. Submit those things. Submit to Jesus Christ by dying to self. There's 5 more steps, but we're going to do it next week because we're going to participate and partake of the Lord's Supper this week and again next week, because it's important for us to know and understand what it is that we're doing. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians about this new covenant. And he writes in chapter 11, verse 23 through 26, "For I pass on to you what I received from the Lord himself. On the night when he was betrayed, the Lord Jesus took some bread and gave thanks to God for it. Then he broke it in pieces and said, 'This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me.' In the same way, he took the cup of wine after supper, saying, 'This cup is the new covenant between God and his people, an agreement confirmed with my blood. Do this in remembrance of me as often as you drink it. For every time you eat this bread and drink this cup, you are announcing the Lord's death until he comes.'